Hello and welcome to yet another virtual event hosted by Tattered Cover Bookstore. For those of you who don't know, Tattered Cover is an independent bookstore in Denver, Colorado, but we obviously have an international reach because of today's guest, who I'll introduce momentarily. My name is Adam. I'm the director of events for the bookstore, and I just want to let you know, if you need or want closed captioning, there is a black bar at the bottom of your YouTube screen, and there's a button that says CC. You can go ahead and click that, and it will make closed captioning available should you want it or need it. Today, we are celebrating the release of Tell Me an Ending by Jo Harkin. Jo studied literature at university, where she daydreamed through various jobs in her 20s before becoming a full-time writer. She currently lives in Berkshire, England, and Tell Me an Ending is her debut novel. She's in conversation today with Meredith Westgate, who grew up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and now lives in Brooklyn, New York. She's a graduate of Dartmouth College and holds an MFA in fiction from the New School. The Shimmering State, which came out last year, is also her debut novel. And if you know anything about me, I love debuts, so I'm glad that these two writers can come together today. Jo and Meredith, please virtually strut on into this virtual room where everyone's clapping for you. You just can't see them because, we're doing a virtual event 2.5 years after a pandemic started. Jo, congratulations.
Thank you. Hi, everyone.
I will hop off. I will let you two go and chat about all things about Tell Me an Ending, about Jo, about literature. If the audience out there has any questions, please put them in the YouTube chat, and I will make sure Meredith and Jo get to them.
Thanks so much, Adam.
Great, thanks so much, Adam. Oh, Jo, I'm so excited and honored to be here to celebrate the launch of Tell Me an Ending. It's so great. And we've sort of connected over being interested in really similar themes in our writing: memory, identity, trauma, what progress looks like. And I'd love for you to start today, since this is launch day of your book in the US. I'd love for you to start by giving sort of your synopsis that you like to introduce Tell Me an Ending.
Oh, sure. So Tell Me an Ending, it's a what if novel. And the what if in this case is, what if you could delete memories of traumatic events? So these would be short periods of time. And then what if you found out that you'd had a memory deleted? You have no idea that this has happened, and you have the opportunity to get that memory back. Would you do it? So the novel basically follows 4 very different characters, all of whom are facing this exact dilemma. They've all received an email from the memory clinic, basically telling them that new technology has come in. These memories that were previously thought to be gone forever are not. And the clinic's obliged to offer them the chance to have these memories recovered. We also see Noor. She's a psychologist working at the memory clinic itself. She loves her job, but has begun to question things lately. She feels like her boss, Louise, might be up to no good, and is questioning the morality and workings of the memory clinic itself.
That's a great, yeah. That's such a beautifully woven together book of these various characters. And when the book starts, we find them all across the world. And I found, especially the experience of reading it, given the last 2 years where we can't travel, we can't really get outside of our immediate locations and tiny worlds, I think it makes it all that much more compelling that when you're moving between these characters, you're also moving not only into very different perspectives and characters, but also into these really wonderful settings, like sort of across all the whole world. And I was wondering, given that it's such an intricately woven sort of character-driven novel, but then also involves this speculative element of a clinic and a company that can now remove, targeted memories or neutralize targeted memories. I was wondering, I'm curious to hear what the initial kernel of this story was, whether it was one of the characters or a scene or maybe something that you read about the actual science behind sort of this targeting of memories that obviously isn't possible now, but could be, in years' time, something that's on the horizon.
Yeah, okay. So this in some ways, this is a weird question because I wasn't sure where the idea had originally come from. I was walking home with my partner one day, talking about speculative fiction, and made the bold claim that I thought I could write a speculative fiction novel. And just after saying it, the whole idea kind of came together for me. I managed to outline most of what became the plot just before, in the 5 minutes before we got to our front door. So obviously there was something going on in my subconscious leading up to that moment that, a lot of things fed into it. I think previously with sci-fi, I'd never really seen a place for myself in that world. I think there's been a lot of person-centered sci-fi and speculative fiction lately. There were things that really inspired me, like Black Mirror, obviously Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which I know you love as well. What else? Margaret Atwood, her speculative fiction, Kazuo Ishiguro. And I think reading these things made me I love this stuff, watching and reading, obviously. And it made me think, I would love to do something like this. It's kind of not sort of a huge world building exercise, but it's taking our very normal, everyday lives, making one tweak, and then thinking, how would that affect us? What do our lives look like with this one thing different? Which I know is and I think that's what I love about your book as well. It's got that, it's very rooted in people that you can imagine being and situations you kind of put yourself in. So that was a huge inspiration. And then obviously the science side, I'm a bit of a thwarted science geek. I started studying psychology at university and switched to English. And I think there's always a bit of me that wants to be a psychologist still. And I like reading studies in my spare time. Mm-hmm. And with the science, we're really not that far off the concepts in the book. We know how to delete memories in rats. We haven't actually tried it on humans yet. I think it's a bit of a jump to make, because while we know the memories are gone, we can't really ask the rats how they feel about it and if they're okay. So I think these solutions for people they're in the future, but it's the not too distant future. And one of the main things that concerned me when I was writing the book is the tech going to catch me up? It was that was a worry. So that was another thing that always hugely fascinated me, and I think it all kind of came together so that on that walk I could just drop this idea on my unsuspecting boyfriend.
It's so interesting you say that, because I think we share the same taste in that of I think we've talked about Never Let Me Go, where it's something that's so tied, it has a speculative element, but what it actually shows you is more about our life today than you almost feel like you have access to writing something without that one element. And so I think that's something you do so beautifully here, and something that's so relevant today in thinking about trauma, and especially right in this moment right now, what are the ways to move through trauma and treat trauma in the most human-centered way. And I think something that you explore in this book that is so important and critical and relevant is being, the sort of unforeseen consequences of progress in technology, something that's intended to help that may, have the fallout that's unexpected. And like you said, a lot of times this progress is tested on a rat who can't say whether they're being haunted by the absence of this memory or these triggers that they can't explain. So I think you do such a great job of asking all these questions around something that would look like progress in this way, and exploring it in different ways through each character, which I think is another one of the really beautiful things about this book, is through each of these 4 characters, in addition to some of the scientists behind the treatment itself, you sort of explore some characters that might have actually benefited from it, some who are dealing with extreme trauma, some who are just sort of grappling with the uncertainty. So you can really create this very holistic view of something that's really complicated. And you answered some of my questions about process. I wanted to ask, because it's so intricately woven together, I was curious if you are someone who outlines ahead of time, if you were following a specific storyline and then built this world, these characters around it. And it sounds like a lot of your process is kind of something that you've realized even on that first walk, that you developed some of the pieces that would, because it is so complicated in the ways that they intersect that it is hard to imagine any piece of it without the rest, because it comes into such a really beautifully ornate sort of puzzle in the end.
Oh, thank you. I think, yeah, I structure things before writing them. I'm not someone who can just sort of put the pieces in place and then write and see where they end up. I'm a planner. I plan everything in my life, and my book's obviously no exception. So yeah, and the timeline was complicated. So yeah, you have these characters who sort of, some of them intersect, some of them not so much. So yeah, the timings and everything, I needed a really strict idea of what was going to happen, because it's not a super short book. It's a complicated book. I think I would have created a lot of problems for myself if I hadn't militantly plotted it all out beforehand. So I think there are a few things that kind of came along. There are a few character developments. You kind of, as you get into it, you think, oh, this person, I think they would do this instead. So in that sense, there's a little bit of spontaneity. But yeah, I spent a long time doing the researching and planning. I think it was nearly a year before I actually started writing. The writing actually flowed quite quickly after that. I think I probably spent more time on the actual pre-prep stage.
I'm jealous of that, because I'm someone who sort of starts writing and figures out what I'm left with, and then does a lot of the structure in revising. And having a similar kind of book with multiple narrators, it makes for an absolute mess when you're trying to do big edits within something like this brilliant structure that you've created. So it makes sense that was well orchestrated ahead of time.
I think it's a beautiful mess though. I'd love to do that approach sometime. I think your book it has fewer character storylines. So I think that's a sort of, and two of the characters, there's a sort of, slightly mysterious love situation going on. So yeah, I think I would like one day to write a book that evolves in this way. But yeah, this was not the book.
Well, speaking of your characters, I mean, I think, like you mentioned, it's so interesting, such an interesting way to explore character in the context of this procedure, because so many of your characters can't remember something, whether it's something they can't remember if they did, or whether they truly can't remember much at all about who they are. And I think it's such an interesting way to explore writing character, when even your characters don't necessarily know themselves. And I was wondering if that, from the beginning, was something that you used to propel the plot forward, with this current kind of mystery that some of the characters are searching to figure out even about themselves, or if that became actually a challenge, because it's hard to write a character, even if you're writing a sort of mysterious story arc for them, when it's even a mystery to them who they are. I think that's such an interesting challenge to put to yourself as a writer.
Yeah, that's true. I kind of went in the deep end with that one. And I think this is something, these characters have a sense of, a lot of them are wrestling with the fact that they feel like they had a self before and they don't know what that self is, and they don't know how that relates to the self they are now. So in their individual journeys, they're all kind of, this is one of the main things that they struggle with. I mean, the book is plotted in that there's, an overarching storyline. There are, there's stuff going on at the clinic and stuff that Nora's working to uncover. But my main focus really is it's their individual explorations of their identities. I think we see, I mean, this isn't just because I'm a writer, I think all humans see ourselves as a story. We see it there's a timeline. We have a very narrative sense of who we are. Something happens when we're young and we put our current personality down to that thing, or it's, either nature or nurture. You could say, oh, my mother was good at this, so I'm good at this. It's, we love to have that sense of history and story, and that's kind of what gives us our security. And then these characters, that security has been taken away. There's a chapter missing. And I think some of them, I think in real life, I'm trying to avoid spoilers here. I think in real life, you'd have some people who would be, their sense of self maybe isn't quite so, linked to this sense of narrative, and maybe they would handle the idea that a piece was gone better than people who want that full timeline.
Yeah, I mean, it brings up another one of my questions, which I think in many ways it's also a book about power, whether it's in these individual characters' relationships with their partners, or parent-child relationship, or doctor-patient relationship. And so I think you bring up really interesting questions about who deserves to have a say in some of those relationships, like this idea of a character not necessarily understanding their identity without a specific memory, or having something built, like lacking the history to build that identity on. And it brings up the question of like, whose choice is that to make for a character? And I think, again, it's hard without giving spoilers, but I think you ask such interesting questions about like what power really looks like, in addition to in the workplace, at Nepenthe, which is the center where these removals take place. So I love that this book that feels like it's about memory and trauma is actually, as most things are, also about power.
Yes, I don't even really get away from power, can you? Especially not in a clinical setting. I think, one of the things that I wanted to explore, and you see this with some of the characters, like some of them are in couples, and we've got, their partners want some kind of involvement in the decisions that are made. So Finn's storyline, he's an architect living in Arizona, he's Irish originally. His wife finds out that she had a memory removed, but this storyline is actually told from Finn's point of view, because he becomes preoccupied with this memory that's gone and starts becoming quite suspicious of what it might be, because they've worked out the timelines, they've been together all the time the clinic was operating. So he knows that she had it done during their marriage and he didn't know anything about it. So he starts to spiral a little bit. So that's a kind of an issue of, who gets a say in what goes on with somebody's brain. And then obviously at the clinic itself, there's a power dynamic with Noor, the psychologist, and her boss, who she really looks up to. She was idealistic when she started there. She sees it as this sort of great place. She admires Louise. And then as time goes on, she kind of starts to wonder if there's been an abuse of power in that situation.
Yeah, Finn's storyline, I think, was one of my favorites. I was so drawn to that relationship. And then there's like another person who shows up and sort of interrupts their home life and brings up all this from the past. I really loved that whole like triangle that was created. His wife's attractive friend David suddenly appears. That doesn't really help his state of mind. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, unfortunate timing. I also, given that this book has a speculative element, I was really struck by how well you navigate introducing that from the get-go, but also withholding and like the perfect balance of building intrigue and bringing the reader along, feeling very comfortable that this is a part of the world that has become sort of second nature to characters, even maybe in part building in like the opposition to it is one way of like cementing that it's really happening in some ways, I think. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that balance of like when you're creating this treatment and introducing it into the world, like was it a constant question in your mind of how much to reveal and when? Because by the end of the book, you create a very clear picture of how it works, what it looks like, sort of when a patient is having this done. But obviously you have to know that from the first page as the writer, but it's a really interesting and sometimes challenging choice of like when to introduce, the bulk of that, or even how much you ever introduce. And sort of it's like the tip of the iceberg. And if you can, create the illusion or like the feeling of safety that there's a whole iceberg underneath the surface, you can get away with like just showing that little tip. And I was wondering what your approach to that was.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Originally I kind of wanted to put it all in, because I had obviously done that year of research, and I just wanted to show off all my homework. And you know, because the tech is so grounded in what, you know, near future stuff. So I did want to kind of go more into like the science behind it and, you know, describe all that. And yeah, I was sort of talked out of that by various in edits, which I think was better for the book. Like you can kind of give a sense of, so there are references to things, which I think if anyone was super interested in it, you know, all the scientists that are name checked in the book, they're real, except for obviously the Nepenthe people themselves. These are real studies, and some of them are just mind-blowing. I have a friend who's a psychologist, and he read the book early on, and there are studies mentioned in the book with this guy called Richard Rubin, who decided to give mental patients electroconvulsive therapy while they're awake, as a way of basically deleting their symptoms. So what he did was he tried to induce like a hallucination or you know, some kind of episode in them, and then while they were conscious, he would quickly give them ECT while the memory of their illness was in effect. Mm-hmm. So this was obviously pretty horrible. The patients not had a nice time, but it actually worked. He didn't know why, because at the time not enough was understood about the ways memory works. Basically, every time you kind of recall a memory, it's vulnerable to change, which we didn't know until pretty recently. It was kind of like, I think, 90s onwards that we sort of began to realize this. So at the time, he got these results, but no one knew why. And obviously, the experiment was pretty unethical. So it just remained an outlier. There are another couple of similar things that nobody really connected and nobody understood. So this experiment was obviously pretty batshit. And my psychologist friend questioned it and said, this doesn't seem like realistic to me. I'm like, actually, this is real life. This happened. I didn't make this up. So yeah, all the references to the scientists like him. You've got Nader, who discovered reconsolidation of memory. You've got Elizabeth Phelps, who was the person who found out about memories of 9/11 changing over time quite dramatically. Often people would put themselves in a different place at the time that the towers fell, and they genuinely had no idea that their memories had altered so much over time. So that's another fascinating one that just gets a mention. So yeah, there are all these scientists who, if someone reads and is kind of as interested in the science side as me, they can look it up, and it's just a fascinating area, basically. But I've had to confine myself to light references. I can't just have huge discussions of all these things which were in the original draft, which was about twice as long.
Oh, yeah, well, I think that's the right way to do it, though, is to sort of put it all in, and then when you pare back, you're left with like just the pieces that would be hard to only have that restraint off the bat. I think is almost impossible, at least from I love that. I want to look into some of those studies. Do you know when the one that you mentioned with the like electrotherapy, when that was from? Is that since the 90s?
Oh, yeah, I should have said that was 70s when things were not so regulated back then.
Yeah,
I don't think you could do it now.
Yeah, well, I think you briefly mentioned this, but to sort of hone it in, are there any books that you often turn to, like that explore memory, or even just explore writing about memory in interesting ways?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously yours is, well, I hadn't read it when because it came out not that long before mine. One that, like, it was striking how many similar areas we approach from very different angles, which I love. Like, I think, they're very different books, but yeah, some of the parallels were brilliant. So I always recommend you, but anyone who liked mine, I'm like, well, you should see this take on it.
Yeah, same here.
So yeah, other books I always recommend. So at the moment, I'm actually reading The Body Keeps the Score, which is nonfiction, and that's about sort of trauma, PTSD, and ways of kind of, and how that exists in the memory, and there's also a focus on the physicality as well. So yeah, that's been really fascinating. I'm halfway through that. That was a recommendation. But yeah, other books books I loved, there were some that kind of they weren't spec fix. So I really like Noah's Compass by Anne Tyler. That's about a guy who someone breaks into his apartment. I think he's retired. He lives in an apartment on his own. His first night there, somebody breaks in, and to burgle the place, he gets a blow to the head and can't remember what happened that night. And this begins to really trouble him, just this idea that something's missing. So yeah, it's a very realistic, Anne Tyler's just so empathetic and human in her writing. It's full Tyler, but it's got a lot of the preoccupations that my book has about self. Obviously, it turns out that his issues are not really about this particular day at all. He's got other stuff going on, which he needs to resolve. But yeah, it's a great one for thematic similarity to mine.
Oh, I could see that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you should totally. Yeah, it was great.
I should check that out.
And, recently, I read The Candy House by Jennifer Egan. I got one to get proof of that one. Yeah, so that's obviously a follow-up to Visit from the Goon Squad, which I loved. And it's kind of a memory sharing thing. You can kind of, which is actually that similar ground to yours. You're able to experience other people's memories, which mine doesn't go into that direction. So yeah, it's a beautiful book. It's polyphonic, like Goon Squad, which was a huge inspiration, the multiple voices. So I knew I would like that one, and I did. It's great.
Yeah, I loved that one too.
It's
so great.
Really good.
And when you've read Goon Squad, it's so fun to see that some of those characters pop up in this. You're like, oh, I miss that guy.
Yeah, they were like old friends, because I've read Goon Squad like 10 times, and it was haunting the way some of them were left. And this actually continues that. It doesn't really give you, it doesn't wrap things up overly. You're still left with quite good questions. So it's very much in the spirit of the first one, which is great, given that it dives into way more kind of speculative territory than the first.
Yeah, absolutely. I know when I think we talked about this, but when that book was announced, it was always a comp for my book for Visit from the Goon Squad. But if it meets Black Mirror, and then it was like Jennifer Egan is now writing.
Yeah, she's done it. She's kind of made us obsolete.
I know, exactly, but I have to have that happen. So I think we're almost ready for questions, but I wanted to ask one last quick question. Is now that the book is out in the world officially today, is there anything that's been a surprise to you about now that people are reading it, the reception, or like the biggest treat of having it out? And then parallel to that, what you found now, like looking back, the biggest challenge of writing the book was?
Okay, so on the nice side of things, today has been it's been great. So I think one thing I didn't expect was the sort of Instagram stuff. I didn't really know that there was a book Instagram. I only just joined because I've got a book out now. But it's just been so nice connecting with writers and reviewers and bookstores, and that's been that's a real unexpected pleasure that I had no idea that was an element of the publishing process. So I've been trying to keep up with messages and stuff today, like sending out a lot of heart emojis. I think I've fallen behind with my hearts, but that's been really, really lovely. And Goodreads as well, actually. Just these sort of social online things that I think of. I don't know what publishing, whether they were as prominent before the pandemic, but I think it feels like they've kind of come into their own now, and they maybe have more emphasis than they did before. And then biggest challenge, so I think probably actually the cuts, because it was huge, and a lot of it was beloved. It was painful getting it down by what I think ended up being definitely a third, probably coming up to half. So knowing what to get rid of was tricky sometimes, and fortunately I had good guidance from my editors on that one. What other challenges? But I guess just the intertwining of the threads. Sometimes I would get a real headache from trying to work everyone out, and but that was more of an ongoing slog situation than as were the cuts.
I could see how
so glad I'm out the other side of those.
Yeah. I could see how cutting it down by that much when it is so intertwined, you realize you can't lose certain things because they're needed to connect to the next, and so you end up with this kind of puzzle in the end.
Yeah. I've always been an overwriter. I used to hand in my university essays, and they were always like 50% too long, and I just have to apologize to my lecturers. In the end, they just started imposing strict limits on me because they just didn't have time to get through it.
Okay, well, now I think we have some questions here. The first question from Mary, outside of literature, was there any media, movies, or TV that influences both of your books?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, TV is maybe, I don't know if I'm going out on a limb saying that it might be a bigger influence on me than books were. Like, I think TV was there with the speculative content. So, there were like things like Black Mirror, and there a lot of stuff like that coming out, I think, with a sort of very thoughtful vibe, a really beautiful aesthetic, that kind of thing. I think when I wrote my book, I sort of had TV partly in mind. I could see it, and I was basically writing a series. So I think, yeah, TV has been a huge influence in that sense. And yeah, Eternal Sunshine I have always loved, and I wanted to kind of take an element of that and take that further, and keep the kind of maybe some of the spirit of Eternal Sunshine, which is very exploratory. It's not kind of making judgments or answering questions. It's creative and observational, and I wanted to sort of preserve that energy in my book. So yeah, these are all huge influences.
I love both of those as well. I'm someone who like hides from things that feel like they might be similar. So I sort of hid from Black Mirror. Someone told me about it once I'd started my book, and I thought that was it. Now my book can never exist, since there have been so many things that are similar. But also I kind of hid from Eternal Sunshine until my book was out, and then watched it, and now it's absolutely one of my favorites. I would say two movies that I loved. One is Another Earth by Britt Marling. It was one of Britt Marling's first.
Oh, I liked her.
Oh, it's a very, very under the radar movie, but it was actually one of the things. It probably came out in like 2008 or 2009, and it was one of the things that really like made me commit to writing, because that was like the exact space that I was interested in. It's this really beautiful, very quiet movie, and it's just the premise is that like another Earth shows up in the sky, and there's this parallel universe that you could have another life, possibly. There's someone possibly living like a mirrored life to yours, but it might be better. And so it's sort of this alternate reality, or maybe things would be better in another reality. I absolutely loved it. Just the treatment of that kind of a speculative element, but the most, subtle character-driven film. And then similarly to that, a film called Marjorie Prime. Have you seen that one?
No, what's it called?
It's called Marjorie Prime.
Marjorie Prime. I'm going to write that down as well.
Also very like under the radar, but it was originally a play, I think. And you can tell because I think there's in the whole film there's maybe three characters, mostly just two. But similarly, it has this slight speculative premise, but it's executed just in like a very quiet, beautiful way. And
I like the quiet sort of very tied to like the human story. I really like the OA, which I think was Britt Marling.
I love Britt Marling. Everything she does. Okay, I have another question that came in from Anna. What's the best book advice, or what's the best advice you received while writing your book?
Well, cut it by a third was obviously that's up there. I think, my agent Felicity actually was really amazing early on. I think she kind of she sort of, I suppose it's not advised so much as an editing process. Like, she would ask questions that made me kind of think about how I had built things up, how everything hung together. Just kind of, I think it's almost like you can see something so clearly in your own head, but until someone reads the book, you don't know if you've conveyed the things you need to convey. So if someone asks you like, so what was what was that all about? And you think you've fully explained it. You know, that's a huge, like, oh, okay. So yeah, I guess not so much advice, and just the experience of being read was transformative. Like, because up until then, obviously, it had been in my head for a very long time. And yeah, just having outside eyes on it. And I was spurred on. I gave it to a whole committee of friends. I think about people read it. So I was juggling a lot of different sets of feedback from them. But it was all just so, you know, you could see where there was consensus. You could see where some people said something completely random that everyone else disagreed with. And I thought that was really helpful, actually. I think I'm scared to give my book to people. And yeah, breaking through that was great. I realize I haven't properly answered the question because I still can't really think of any advice. It was more kind of specific feedback on the book itself and just that experience of having other eyes on it.
Yeah, I think also when you're in the thick of it, sometimes the best advice is just like, keep going. Like you have to.
Well, actually, yeah, that's
what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Have faith in it. I think, yeah, I mean, initially, it's a bit of a, it's not the sort of simplest narrative, it goes between different characters. And I didn't have that much confidence in that at first, because I think that's something that not every reader adores. You get immersed in one character's viewpoint, and then you're booted out and you have to kind of get into somebody else. After a while, obviously it comes full circle and you're like, oh, I know this person, I'm back with them, and it's okay. But yeah, it's a challenge. And so I think I was concerned about that at first. So anyone who reassured me that actually that was okay, that was really nice to hear in the beginning. So yeah, not so much advice, it's just comfort.
There's all my favorite books are always that like multi-narrator cast of characters.
I love
it. I think it also lends itself to just like the most satisfying endings. And I think your ending and Tell Me an Ending naturally has a wonderful ending. But it's so,
and it needs to be.
Yeah,
I have to tell you an ending.
But I really found it so satisfying. Endings are so hard, and I think that you kept that momentum and like built. There's just so much it's hard not to spoil anything, but there's so much emotional impact by the end, especially that you just wanted to keep going, but you're also so satisfied with how it ended. And wow. So just bravo to you for that. And then one more question from Jeremy, or maybe we'll have some more come in, but Jeremy, outside of speculative fiction, what sort of books do you like to read? I already answered that for myself, the multi-narrator books.
So, I mean, I'm probably, literary fiction is I don't know if that's a term in America. Yeah. Sort of, more sort of experimental type of books I love. That's what excites me. I kind of read quite widely. I really like historical. The next thing I'm working on is historical. So I've been reading a lot of, great books in sort of medieval period is what I'm immersed in at the moment. So reading Hilary Mantel, as well as some more kind of different things like James Meek, To Calais in Ordinary Time it was really, really good. I could go on. I won't list all the historical books I've been reading, but yeah, that's been an area that I've been really enjoying. And obviously, yes, spec fic, I love.
Oh, I love that. Your next project sounds amazing. That sounds very exciting.
Another challenge. I'm probably going to spend 2 years researching this one. So yeah, don't hold your breath for it.
Yeah. Are you drawn to projects that involve that like period of research before?
The medieval era so this is like the 1400s, so this is just before Henry VIII. This is actually the reign of his father, who's a bit more of a shadowy figure, but really fascinating. So it hasn't actually had a lot of attention in fiction. I didn't just go for it because I thought it was underexploited. It was genuinely like an interesting period for me. I like just after the English Civil War and just before Henry VIII obviously came and started killing lots of women. So yeah, that's always, it's a great time in history. I like ancient history as well, but I think it's a slightly trickier area. It was so foreign. And yeah, maybe further down the line, depending on how this one goes.
Here's
Yes, what's funny is I always like to ask, like, what are you working on next? And then you naturally answer that before I even hop back on. So I'll pivot my question, and I'm curious because I am just curious about debut authors, especially during the publicity cycle. Jo, you mentioned how Pub Day is going. It's not out in the UK yet. How are you handling like this time of life when like you're not really, your job isn't to be a writer, it's to be like yourself promoting yourself? How are you doing?
Yeah, it's I mean, I feel like a lot of writers would say this. Haven't actually asked that many. I will now, but I think I prefer writing. This is nice, and I think it's actually a real pleasure, these events, kind of talking to people that I know, and that's actually, this is like me and Meredith having a catch up. Like, this is great. But I think, yeah, promotional stuff in general, it's a funny one because I'm not sure what the Venn diagram of people who like to be at home by themselves working on something, working on a book, and people who like to be on stage or in front of people talking about something. I don't know how much that really overlaps. So yeah, to have someone who's creative and a self-promoter I feel like that might be rare. It's not really me. But yeah, I'm kind of more enjoying the social side of it. And yeah, that I think after COVID, it's kind of like, I'm still kind of quite high on human contact. So that's nice. But yeah, it's a funny one. I think, you're slightly out of your comfort zone to be kind of talking about yourself so much after so long of not. So yeah, an interesting time.
Yeah. And Meredith, your book came out, late August, right? August 2021. What was the biggest thing you learned during the book's out? Let's Zoom, Instagram Live, podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways I learned that part of it is just sort of enjoying having it out there and having those conversations. I think for me was the most fulfilling part of it. I totally echo your feelings, Jo, that like it feels so foreign to, I mean, in some ways, I worked on my first book for like 7 years or something. And was just thinking and rethinking these themes and the things I was interested in engaging with. And so to be able to talk about it, even like aside from the book itself, but to talk about these things I'm really interested in about memory and identity, it was just really fun to be able to like have some really interesting conversations. But it has taken some like adjustment to get back into writing because those things are so foreign that it almost like having to like sort of position your book and discuss these different themes, it is such a different part of your brain that you're using. It's almost more like being a critic or something. And it's taken me a long time to almost like silence that a little bit to get back to the part of the brain that feels like free to also just create. But yeah, I mean, I just, it still sort of amazes me that my book is in the world and that people have read it. I think is just like the biggest joy of all of it.
It's pretty weird after being just you in the book for so long. Out there is, wild. As you say.
Yeah, I think also the biggest treat is like going to bookstores and signing or just seeing it on a shelf in a bookstore. That'll always for me just be like the biggest dream of it all. It just feels surreal.
Yeah, and Jo, you haven't been able to see your book because it's not in stores in the UK yet.
Meredith sent a photo of it in New York, which was lovely. That's a real highlight of my day. I'd love to do that. Thank you.
I'll send you some more. I'll go around the city. I love looking.
If you could go around all the major US cities, that would be great. Thank you.
Exactly.
I'll go upstairs. Our offices are in the basement of the bookstore. I'll go upstairs and get a photo and post it on our Instagram.
Oh, I would love that. Yeah, thank you.
Well, where can we connect with both of you on the internet? What's the best way to follow you to see what's going on in your life?
Instagram for me. I'm not on Twitter. I haven't set up a website. I'm the worst. So yeah, just Jo Harkin writer on Instagram is where I'm to be found.
And same here. I'm not on Twitter, but I'm on Instagram at Meredith Westgate, and also have I have an email address. Oh my gosh, a website, meredithwestgate.com.
Perfect. And you can get both of their books at tatteredcover.com, The Shimmering State for Meredith and Tell Me an Ending, which is out now in the US by Jo Harkin. Thank you both so much for taking the time to talk to us and be here and celebrating. Jo, congratulations again. I love that we were able to do this on your book's publication day in America. Have fun when it comes out in 2 months in the UK and when you're doing all these events all over again for a whole different crowd.
Thank you so much for hosting. It's been, this has been lovely, really nice.
Yeah, thank you so much. Congratulations again. And so excited for everyone to read Tell Me an Ending. It's just, you're in for such a treat. It's such a wonderful book.
Oh, thank you. Well, you can't go wrong with Shimmering State either. And thank you so much, Meredith. Your questions were super thoughtful and lovely. And it's
It's such a treat to talk to you. So nice.